Hello and welcome to Novara Live. I'm Moya Lothian-McLean, and tonight I'm thrilled to be joined by Helena, aka No Justice MTG, on YouTube and Twitch. Helena, hello.
Hi there, how are you doing? I just come back from voting in the local elections. Looking forward to tackle politics of more different sort this evening.
Yes, it has been an absolutely jam-packed day, and I am legitimately excited about doing the show tonight. So, coming up later, we will be talking about the immigration raid that has been shut down in South London because the local community blocked it. Labour have weakened yet another one of their policy offers, and whilst Israel's war in Gaza continues, we look at the violence also taking place in the West Bank. Stay tuned for all of that. And before we get going, a reminder that the polls are open till 10 p.m. If you want to know more about the local elections, or specifically the competition that's happening in the northeast of England, we've just done a documentary on devolution. And it's all about the metro mayors when the devolved powers that are going to different regions of England. Check that out on our YouTube channel. Yes, I present it. That's why I'm plugging it. Hundreds of protesters have been arrested at the UCLA campus in the US, according to police reports. The arrest followed a night of raids on the pro-Palestine encampment carried out by the Los Angeles Police Department. Officers armed with flashbangs and firing what appeared to be rubber bullets on students.
For your safety! For your safety!
What is that quote? It's imperialism, I'm paraphrasing here, imperialism practices its violence elsewhere on colonized people, then eventually it comes home. Now, those raids came in the wake of violent attacks by a pro-Israeli mob on the encampment on Tuesday. After several hours of police inactivity, while the peaceful pro-Palestine protesters were attacked with bats, stones, and fireworks, the LAPD eventually ordered the mob to leave. But on Wednesday night, the police came back, this time for the pro-Palestinian protesters. The raid began early in the evening, while large numbers of police officers in riot gear entered the campus. Meanwhile, down the hill from the tents, dozens of police vehicles lined up. At around 6 p.m, police ordered the protesters to disperse. But the protesters refused. UCLA management had previously been less heavy-handed with pro-Palestine encampments than other administrations of the likes of Columbia and Austin, but that seems to have come to an end thanks to the violence enacted by the people rampaging under pro-Israeli banners. Although it seemed to me that there was a convergence of causes from the footage that I saw of Tuesday's raid by that mob, because what I saw was people enacting violence under Israeli banners, but I also saw them yelling far-right language like NPC. And I suspect a lot of those people there did not give two hoots about Israel or even the cause of anti-Semitism and Jewish people at large. I suspect a lot of them were young, very hard-right, conservative men who wanted to enact a bit of violence. But however, talking of people who want to enact a bit of violence, when the police entered UCLA, the situation didn't escalate straight away. The immediate result of Wednesday's raid was an hours-long standoff between police and protesters who were barricaded inside the encampment. According to the LA Times, hundreds of other pro-Palestinian protesters arrived on the scene, packing the courtyard between the police officers and the encampment's borders. In the early hours of Thursday morning, that standoff came to an end. That's when officers wearing body armour, helmets and face shields began to tear down the encampment's barricades. Protesters, meanwhile, tried to hold them off with umbrellas, buckets of water, and fire extinguisher sprays. There's a real difference between the two things that people had there on hand. Police responded with rubber bullets, flashbangs, and flares, and soon the arrests began. According to the authorities, over 130 people were taken into custody and removed via buses. But many protesters continue to defy the police order to disperse. These were the scenes at dawn as police picked the encampment apart.
We will not stop, we will not rest. We will not stop, we will not rest. We will not stop, we will not rest.
One protester told journalists what he thought of the timing of the raid.
I think it's especially galling for a lot of protesters because less than 24 hours ago, the protesters in this encampment were attacked by more than 200 unidentified counter-protesters who showed up in the middle of the night and assaulted the encampment for 7 hours. And the police didn't show up for the first 3 or 4. And then when they did, they sat around and they watched for another hour and a half. And for them to come out the next night to remove us from the encampment after they felt absolutely no obligation or duty to protect the first night, it doesn't make any sense, but it also makes all the sense in the world. I'm not surprised.
Over the last 2 weeks, more than 1,600 protesters have been arrested on US campuses. There have been other incidents of violence on American campuses, but the images from UCLA seem to most powerfully show the naked suppression of dissent. And it's those images that led US President Joe Biden to make this speech today.
In moments like this, there are always those who rush in to score political points. But this isn't a moment for politics. It's a moment for clarity. So let me be clear. Peaceful protest in America. Violent protest is not protected. Peaceful protest is. It's against the law when violence occurs. Destroying property is not a peaceful protest. It's against the law. Vandalism, trespassing, breaking windows, shutting down campuses, forcing the cancellation of classes and graduations. None of this is a peaceful protest. Threatening people, intimidating people, instilling fear in people is not peaceful protest. It's against the law. Dissent is essential to democracy, but dissent must never lead to disorder or to denying the rights of others so students can finish the semester and their college education. Look, it's basically a matter of fairness. It's a matter of what's right. There's the right to protest, but not the right to cause chaos. People have the right to get an education, the right to get a degree, the right to walk across the campus safely without fear of being attacked.
I don't know about you, but the only people I've seen causing chaos on these campuses are university administrators, police, and mobs who act under the pro-Israeli banner, but seem to be also in coalition with the far right. Biden had better watch out, though, because he seems to be pleasing no one. This footage captured at the University of Alabama shows a standoff between pro-Palestinian protesters on one side and counter-protesters on the other. Now, both sides were saying, fuck Joe Biden, which seems to be a message everyone can agree on, apparently. Doesn't look good for an upcoming election. And force isn't the only way the US government is trying to stifle pro-Palestinian activism. The House of Representatives has voted to pass a new anti-Semitism bill in response to the protests sweeping US campuses. Backed by Republicans, the bill defines anti-Semitism in accordance with the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's working definition of anti-Semitism. That's the one that tries to conflate criticism of Israel with anti-Jewish hate, and has already been controversially adopted in the UK at many educational institutions and used to suppress pro-Palestinian activism. Now, US lawmakers passed this bill despite its threat to the free speech so beloved by American patriots, at least when it's speech that suits them. This is what the American Civil Liberties Union said about the bill. Federal law already prohibits anti-Semitic discrimination and harassment by federally funded entities. The bill is therefore not needed to protect against anti-Semitic discrimination. Instead, it would likely chill free speech of students on college campuses by incorrectly equating criticism of the Israeli government with anti-Semitism. And that is exactly what has happened already in Britain. Helena, do you think these encampments have served their purpose now they've been broken up, or do they still have ways to go before their demands are met?
I think that the idea that the demands are going to be met anytime soon, I think, is unlikely currently, given how forceful a lot of these campuses have been in trying to suppress those protests, depending on where you look at. What it definitely has served to do, even if it's not changing the position of the universities or indeed of the American state more broadly, is that it's really kind of shone a light on just how partisan and insane American media discourse has been around this entire event, rife with disinformation and opinion touted as fact. It has a lot of comparison with me with kind of the Iraq War and Vietnam War protests, in the same kind of misinformation carries all the time. Like people saying, well, loads of these people are outsiders who are just all being part of the pro-Hamas unit. They've all been funded by this, which is, there's no evidence for any of this at all. When you actually go down on the ground, you see people of all different faiths. One of the encampments had there was people engaging in a Jewish prayer and things like that around there. So it's just complete nonsense being parroted by a lot of these news agencies. And on top of that, being able to platform members of the police force saying things like, well, we found these bike clocks that they've been using, which are clearly kind of heavy duty for people who would want to cause a nuisance, when actually these were bike clocks that were given to them by, for example, Columbia University. So the kind of things that all of these encampments and protests have done have really thrown into sharp focus just how partisan the coverage of them has been so far. On top of that, it's also shown how ridiculous the discourse can be internationally as well, in that not only do we have the President of the United States commenting on them directly, we have the Prime Minister of Israel commenting on them directly. We literally had Netanyahu talking about protests in America, whilst at the other side of his mouth saying, how dare the US try and get involved in Israeli political matters, which I find quite hypocritical. When it comes to what Joe Biden's been saying, though, saying things like, well, we need to uphold law and order. And I'm like, don't seem so keen on wanting to uphold international law. Yet when there's a bunch of protesters peacefully protesting, again, he talks about violent protest, and say, well, you can't shut down campuses and make sure lessons are cancelled. That's not peaceful. It absolutely is peaceful demonstration. It may be disruptive, but it's certainly not violent in any way. And this kind of state crackdown, this kind of violent state crackdown on peaceful protest, if this was done in a country like China, for example, as it has done in the past, you would have seen widespread condemnation for the same kind of outlets and people. But because it's being done by the supposedly free states of America, suddenly we have a completely different narrative on our hands. One last comparison that I will make, and forgive me if this is a crass comparison, but it just shows the rhetorical strength of peaceful protest in the face of brutal crackdowns, which is exactly what the international community saw within the first Intifada, when peaceful Palestinians protesting, striking, demonstrating, engaging in civil disobedience and resistance against the Israeli state, broadly grew sympathy internationally for the Palestinian cause in the face of, was it 27-1 the Palestinian versus Israeli casualty within the first year of the first Intifada. And so even if the media coverage, this is completely insane and the political discourse has no basis in reality, I do believe that broadly as time goes on, these will seem to be people who are on the right side of history, and it will only serve to further the pro-Palestinian cause to see these people have their dissent shut down violently.
Well, I totally agree. The way that we look at, student protests now, Vietnam, BLM, these kind of protests are really, what's the word? They're lauded. But the problem is, the further away we get from the history, such as the protests against the war in Vietnam, the more that the state goes, wow, these were amazing. They stood up against this oppression, and then they just do it again. They just oppress whoever is standing up in that moment. It's great to be on the right side of history, but I just wish that the right side of history would be recognized at the time by the people that are being protested against. We'll see. In the UK, though, campus protests are growing too, but they're not getting as much media coverage as their US counterparts, presumably because university administrators are not so hot for the police. British universities have been home to frequent pro-Palestinian actions, including protests and occupations, since October 7th. But in the last few weeks, encampments have been springing up here too. Here's a map made by London Student Action for Palestine. Students at Leeds, Bristol, Manchester, Sheffield, Newcastle, Goldsmiths, UCL and Swansea have begun erecting tents outside of university buildings in solidarity with Gaza. At University College London, students under the banner UCL Action for Palestine have already been occupying a room in the university's main building since the middle of March. Now, that occupation led to a meeting with university management, who have reportedly now agreed to some demands, including more funding for Palestinian scholarships, reviewing UCL's working relationship with Tel Aviv University, and reviewing research undertaken at UCL in collaboration with arms companies. UCL Action for Palestine, though, has said that that is not enough and have promised to keep up the pressure until UCL, quote, completely cuts ties with genocide. They are honouring that promise because in recent hours, students at UCL have begun an encampment on the grounds. At Warwick, students have already set up an encampment at the town's piazza more than a week ago after the university ignored their previous demonstrations. I'm joined now by Bronwyn Mehta, a PhD student at Warwick University and member of Warwick Stands with Palestine. Bron, what are the demands being made by campaigners?
We have four demands that are being made that are outlined in our constitution. The first of which is for the university to divest from arms companies and defence contractors. People in the UK don't realise how complicit the UK higher education system is in fueling conflict around the world, including this genocide in Gaza. So we're asking Warwick to end their partnerships with companies like BAE Systems. Secondly, we're asking them to condemn Israeli war crimes and call for a permanent and immediate ceasefire with a just outcome for Palestinians. Thirdly, we're asking them to commit to rebuilding the Gazan higher education system. All of the universities in Gaza have been destroyed by Israeli bombing. So we want the university to commit material resources to help building those universities. And lastly, we're asking the university to protect the academic freedoms, freedom of speech of Palestinian students and scholars, and any academics and students that are showing solidarity for the Palestinian cause.
How has Warwick's management responded thus far? Because I know there was quite a lot of persecution for academics who spoke out for Palestine recently at Warwick before this genocide even kicked off.
This encampment is kind of the culmination of 7 months of mobilization. So we've been holding rallies, marches, sit-in, demonstrations. We've written open letters. And thus far, the university have said that this issue is on the agenda, but they haven't been taking the situation with the urgency and seriousness that it needs. And all of these marches and sit-ins, we've experienced high levels of security with external security brought in, filming us on iPads, obviously with a kind of intimidation approach. The encampment thus far has been very peaceful. Management haven't shown any direct hostility to it. So we've managed to create quite a nice, peaceful, community-based space for the time being, and we hope that will continue.
What about responses to the demands that you're making thus far?
As I say, the university have said that these issues are on the agenda, but as I'm sure you're aware, universities will kind of use things like that to kick the can down the road and not really address demands head on. So as of yet, there haven't been any direct communications between management and the occupying students. We hope that in the coming days that will begin so that management can start to actually make material commitments to these demands. But as I say, as of yet, they're just trying to kind of pretend that the issue isn't as important to the students and staff as it is.
Are you linked in with other student encampments? What kind of lines of communication are happening?
So I think everything's happening quite organically at the moment. So there's a lot of kind of communication across Instagram, but I think each university, it's kind of springing up on its own. And then once it's already there, then we kind of reach out. There's some organizations that are offering legal services and kind of support with negotiations that are speaking to all the different encampments. So they're a kind of linking group that can put us in touch if we need to have direct contact with other groups. But so far it's kind of coming out quite organically, which is really, really exciting to see. So we have no idea where the next encampment is going to spring up. But once it does, we'll share our support and solidarity with them.
Do you think it will be key to link in with those other encampments to ensure that there's this, this organised UK-wide approach to this issue in universities?
Yeah, I think it's really important because while our demands are Warwick focused, and I think a lot of the encampments do focus their demands on the specific universities, the issue is of higher education in the UK in general. And so it's really great, I think, to start building up these connections now so that we can build a longer lasting movement that continues to kind of put pressure and critique how higher education is interacting with arms companies and defense contractors in the future. And I think especially with student movements, because students are often only there for 3 years, it can be hard to turn these moments of action into longer lasting movements. So I think building up these connections now will be really important for helping the movements kind of stay and remain, even if the immediate demands are met.
Obviously, I imagine the student encampments in the US have added new fuel to an already burning fire. What lessons are you taking from those American encampments?
What's been really beautiful to watch in the encampments is the kind of bravery of the students kind of coming together in community. So I think that's really inspired the local communities and the students on campus to kind of participate. Even if they're not staying overnight, they'll still kind of come to events. So I think they're motivated by what they're seeing in the US. But in terms of specific lessons, I think one thing that's been really helpful is in terms of negotiation strategies. Documents are coming out of the US suggesting that universities will basically create committees in order to seem like they're taking these demands seriously. But based on the advice from these American universities, they've seen that that is a way of the universities basically trying to avoid making kind of clear and direct agreements. So that's been a useful thing that we've kind of learned from them, as well as just seeing how kind of community can be built in these kind of spaces.
Why do you think this is happening en masse at universities and not other places like specific workplaces, for example? Is this deliberate strategy?
Universities are always kind of part of important moments in history. We saw this with South Africa. We saw this with Black Lives Matter. Students are politically engaged young people who want to create a better world for themselves to live in. So it's not a surprise that that young people are kind of rising up in this moment. But as I say, I think universities specifically are directly complicit in genocide in a way that other industries might not be, because of the level of research and development that is done in partnership between universities and these defense contractors. So I do think the university is a kind of key front that this change needs to be had. And also because what we've seen in Gaza with the entirety of the higher education system being wiped out, I think it's our duty as UK universities who care about international knowledge production to kind of take a stand and say that the impact of destroying universities for a people is huge and it's dramatic and it has lasting legacies. So I think higher education is kind of an important space for these conversations to be had.
The UK government launched a massive deportation operation this week in an attempt to get their flagship Rwanda scheme off the ground before they are booted out of power. According to reporting by The Guardian, since Monday, there have been, quote, dozens of detentions across the entire country, including in Glasgow, Liverpool, and Bristol. Asylum seekers turning up to routine appointments are being detained, while immigration enforcement teams are conducting detention operations in the field that are rounding up refugees. But these operations are being met with fierce resistance in some quarters. Luna House in South London is the main Home Office building for processing asylum applications. And this was the scene outside Luna House on Monday as officials attempted to remove several men who had been, quote, misled into thinking they were attending standard appointments and then found themselves being detained. At least one of those detained was told explicitly they were being removed to Rwanda.
They come here for a better life, and a racist Conservative government illegally deports them out of fear and prejudice. How dare you!
Although protesters successfully blocked the Lunar House removals for 2 days, on Wednesday, a midnight police operation saw at least 2 people spirited away in vans. But this morning, more scenes of resistance unfolded in South London, this time in Peckham. From 7:30 a.m, protesters surrounded a coach after anti-raids groups became aware that 8 asylum seekers at a local hotel were going to be removed to the Bibby Stockholm. The Bibby Stockholm, for those who've forgotten, is the floating prison barge the government is using to accommodate asylum seekers. Attempts to remove refugees to the barge have ramped up in recent weeks, and there are fears that this is all an effort to make it easier to deport people to Rwanda. Last week, protesters in Margate successfully defeated the Home Office's attempt to move a group of asylum seekers to the ship. Reporting today by Novara Media's Charlotte England says that asylum seekers are being, quote, tricked into going to the Bibby. Novara Media was told that immigration officials are informing refugees under threat of removal that moving to the barge would help, quote, their asylum claims, and resisting would leave them homeless. Some people were even promised better conditions at the Bibby Stockholm, with officials allegedly describing life on board as a sunny, 5-star experience. This is the ship which has been plagued by outbreaks of disease, including Legionella and norovirus, and where Albanian asylum seeker Leonard Faraku tragically died by suicide last year. It's understood that the refugees housed in the Peckham Hotel had all appealed their removal to the barge. This is from Novara Media's report. Some were rejected for, quote, silly reasons, while others with strong claims simply didn't hear back from the Home Office. Salah, an Egyptian asylum seeker living in the hotel, said he had challenged the decision to move him, but had all but given up hope and packed his bag to leave before he saw the resistance outside the hotel this morning. Local activists blocking the coach also reported it was scheduled to stop at 3 more locations across Greater London to collect asylum seekers. As the day wore on, a stronger police presence resulted in at least 30 arrests.
Out the way now! Stop doing that!
The Metropolitan Police later confirmed arrests had been made on grounds including obstruction of the highway and obstructing police, but more people turned up to prevent the coach moving. People are still being held as we go to air. And of course, being a bit of London where a lot of the media lives, journalists descended on the scene, both in a reporting and protesting capacity. I was there myself from about 8:50 a.m. this morning, in what capacity I will not say, but when reporters from GB News arrived, protesters had a little message for them. The coach eventually departed from Peckham with no passengers, and it must have been a pretty uncomfortable ride for the driver, as all the tyres had been magically deflated. The Home Office has released a statement denouncing the Peckham protests, and they said this: "This behaviour is intimidatory and aggressive. As part of our commitment to significantly reducing the use of hotels, asylum seekers are being moved into alternative accommodation to reduce costs on the taxpayer. We have returned 150 hotels to local communities, and we work closely with accommodation providers to manage the exit process in a way which limits the impact on local authorities and asylum seekers." While the Bibby Stockholm has cost the taxpayer at least £22 million, and it's not replacing the use of hotels, they're still in use. However, guess what would cost less? A reformed immigration system that processes claims quickly, allows refugees to work, and provides social housing rather than using hotels. But no, let's stick with the misery ship. The Peckham action was heralded by anti-raids campaigners as a sign of increasing awareness and ability to resist immigration raids. One activist told Novara Media that it felt like, quote, people are really upskilling. Whether this level of resistance and organisation is limited to densely populated urban areas, though, remains to be seen. This was posted by campaigner Nicola David on X. 4 men from the Bibby Stockholm were detained yesterday when they went to report in Bournemouth. Protesters attempted to stop the vans leaving, but they were insufficient and did not succeed. They promised to be there in numbers in a fortnight. In Manchester as well today, anti-raids activists told me directly that they attempted to repel a removal at an industrial estate in Salford. However, due to a lack of people on the ground, police were able to clear the way and remove several refugees at the location. They also made 3 arrests in Salford, with 2 people still reportedly being held in custody. Helena, What's your reaction to today's events in South London?
I find it very contradictory for the Home Office I find it contradictory for the Home Office to describe the actions of the people protesting and preventing these kind of removals as being intimidatory and aggressive when you look at A, the actions of the police, and B, what the state is trying to engage in here, which is a performative cruelty on people that they have deemed to be unworthy of humane treatment. Now, again, it's worth qualifying that claim because, of course, we've got to take their claims at face value and then debunk them. Obviously, they say, we need to reduce the usage of hotels to save money, and that's the only reason why we're using the baby Stockholm. Now, the first point about this is that they had plans to use the baby Stockholm at over its actual capacity by cramming more people in than it should have crammed in. And if they did that, it was reported that it would be 6 pence per day cheaper to house them on the baby Stockholm than in a hotel room, which of course is, that's your price that you get for, treating people not as human, I guess. But even then, it's not full. It won't very unlikely to be full. And it was reported on by both the Independent and the Telegraph in December that it literally costs more to have the baby Stockholm at regular capacity full of migrants than it would do if it was in hotels. So they're not even saving money. So we know full well this is about performative cruelty. And I think there's a kind of rhetorical sleight of hand being engaged in here with the government in trying to imply that, we need to have these terrible conditions for asylum seekers because that's the only way we're going to be able to deter them coming over in small boats. Yet, not every single person who's being moved to Baby Stockholm or is even part of our asylum system, who's in the queue to have their asylum claim heard, is necessarily someone who was arrived on small boat, or even somebody who might be sent to Rwanda under their other levels of quote unquote deterrent. So it doesn't even work in that regard because it's not actually being used to deter people necessarily crossing the channel, especially when, again, it's such a small proportion of the broader scale of those who have arrived via irregular means across the channel. Again, it's just red meat for their base for no reason and at extra expense to the taxpayer, as has been reported, because they're spending more on it than they would be indeed in using hotels. As you have mentioned before, the way that we stop using hotels is by actually having people's asylum claims getting processed. But this is what austerity gets you. This is exactly what austerity gets you. It's what I was talking about on the show on Tuesday, where you have people who have legitimate asylum claims. 75% of these are accepted on appeal, roughly between 70 and 75%. So we know that a bunch of these people who are in limbo, who do want to come here and build a life and who do want to be able to get jobs and be part of our communities are stuck in hotels they don't really want to be in, and at worst are trying to get moved to the baby Stockholm. And the people who don't have any reason to be here, or people who might, very, very tiny minority people who might engage in criminality, are also given the ability to do so because they can't actually have their asylum claim processed and be able to get put into the population to be able to build a new life if they had a real asylum claim. That's what austerity gets you, folks. The worst of every single world and massively increased costs down the line. And what do we have to show for it? Deliberate inhumane cruelty on people who are just seeking to be able to flee persecution. And it's just disgusting, really. And I have full solidarity with every single person who's out there today trying to stop these deportations happening. Because all it reminds me of, one, it's a more positive note, was that moment, I think it was in Glasgow, where the huge crowd stopped this one man getting deported, and there's him cheering outside of the police van. And so hopefully we'll see many more of those moments in the coming months and weeks.
That line about austerity, this is what austerity gets you, is just so key. Now, if you're watching this and you are interested in, I couldn't possibly say perhaps helping resist a deportation raid, look up your local anti-raids group because they will have the information, and it is the numbers that matter if you want to have success in resisting a deportation raid. You didn't hear it from me. Israel's assault on Gaza over the last 7 months has led to the killing of nearly 35,000 people, and that's just the people they found above the rubble. But the war has also led to violence in the occupied West Bank. Since October 7th, around 500 people have been killed in the Fatah-controlled territory, either by the State of Israel or by settlers. 124 of them were children. This was the funeral of Khaled Eruk, a 16-year-old Palestinian boy killed by Israeli border police in Ramallah last week. He was shot in the chest while protesting an ongoing IDF raid on Ramallah. According to border police, he was killed for throwing stones and rocks at soldiers who, quote, responded by shooting to neutralise the threat. That's heavily protected soldiers armed with automatic weapons deciding that stone throwing carries a death sentence. Except that Khaled al-Rouk wasn't just any Palestinian boy resisting the occupation. He was also the son of Suleiman al-Rouk, a colonel in the Palestinian Authority's military intelligence division. That division's job is to protect the leaders of the PA, who at least nominally control parts of the West Bank. But now Aruk has spoken out against the authorities' inability or unwillingness to protect West Bank Palestinians from Israeli violence. Speaking to The Guardian, Aruk said this: "They don't defend anyone, they hide when Israelis come. Of course we need protection, and they should be the ones protecting us." Now, those are the words of a grieving father and should be taken as such. But elsewhere in the West Bank, discontent with ruling party Fatah, as well as longtime Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas, is growing. In February, Amnesty International reported a spike in the use of lethal force against Palestinians in the occupied West Bank and called for an urgent investigation by the International Criminal Court. That uptick is backed by members of the Palestinian Authority. One of them told The Guardian this: "I'm also from the PA. I'm a police officer, but what can we do? Whether the Israelis have something on you or not, they can execute you. It's revenge. Before October 7th, they'd come, but not with this brutality, using stun grenades, rubber bullets, or tear gas. Now it's all live bullets, and they shoot to kill." The frequent raids by the IDF, as well as ongoing settler attacks on Palestinian civilians, has undermined faith in the authority to protect West Bank citizens. Mahmoud Abbas's popularity has plummeted, with recent polling finding just 7% of West Bank residents are satisfied with his leadership. Yet he has refused to hold an election since 2009, and just 10% of the West Bank was satisfied with the Palestinian Authority. Hanan Ashwari is a politician from the Palestinian Liberation Organization. She told The Guardian this: "The problem right now is you have horrific carnage that has to be dealt with, and our leadership was seen to be missing in action. For decades, it was told that the only way to survive and stay in power is by making nice. They lost sight of the fact that people feel you have no legitimacy if you postpone elections and distort your decision-making to suit the Americans. The question of the Palestinian Authority's legitimacy is likely to have a profound impact on what happens to Palestine after the war on Gaza. The US has called for a revamped authority to play a key role in post-war arrangements in the region. And obviously, an authority widely seen as serving the Americans would be the party the Americans are most likely to trust. But it's hard to see how an organization that's no longer seen by Palestinians as representing their security or national interests could muster the legitimacy to fill that role, leaving a dangerous political vacuum, which is part of the reason Hamas rose to power in 2006 in Gaza. There was a widespread failure of confidence in Fatah. Meanwhile, in Gaza, Israel's assault continues. Israeli forces continue to deploy near Rafah in southern Gaza, which is a crowded region now home to around 1.5 million people, most of whom have been people displaced by the war. The buildup of the IDF troops and machinery in the area is thought to be ahead of Israel's planned ground operation on the city. Hamas, however, is not making it easy. Those attacks took place in the Netzarim corridor, a military-built highway that Israel has made to cut Gaza's north off from the south. Running east to west across the centre of the Strip, it's a key route for the IDF, giving them fast access to the middle of Gaza. And it's also where the IDF plans to create a so-called safe zone for Palestinians moved out of Rafah, which is why it's become a focus for resistance actions. This is from the Critical Threats Project. Palestinian militias targeted Israeli forces with mortar and rocket fire at least 6 times along the Netzarim corridor on May the 1st. Palestinian militias have claimed almost daily indirect fire attacks targeting Israeli forces near the Netzarim corridor since April 18th. Well, so much for eliminating Hamas. Today, ending in Y, which means it's another watering down of commitments from the Labour Party leadership. On the chopping block now are promises made to workers. Labour have previously trumpeted their New Deal for workers as a key pledge to enact if they're elected into government at the next opportunity. And their promises for this New Deal, pretty good. They include banning 0 hours contracts, ending fire and rehire, and scrapping the qualifying periods for basic working rights. That's probationary periods, for those who need a translation. Except now, Labour are quietly revising their stance on some elements of this deal after alleged lobbying from big business. This includes that pledge to ban 0 hours contracts, because 0 hour contracts will apparently not now be fully banned. Instead, businesses will be required to offer contracts based on the regular hours worked, but workers can also request a 0 hour contract. This has obviously sparked fears that uneven power dynamics will leave some workers forced into requesting contracts that they do not want. Further alterations to the deal also reportedly include dropping the implementation of fair pay agreements in different industrial sectors. They now might be limited to just social care sectors. And also, the parties promise to end those probationary periods where workers do not have access to a full range of protections. Reporting by the Financial Times also revealed that Labour will emphasise that their workers' rights policies will be subject to formal consultation with business, allowing for dilution of the promises when turned into practice and the potential for significant delay. What happened to that first 100 days? Unions, as you can guess, are not happy with the trailed changes. When news leaked on May Day, aka International Workers' Day, Unite boss Sharon Graham did not mince her words. Choosing May Day to give notice of watering down your promises to overhaul one of the worst sets of employment rights in Europe is beyond irony. If Labour do not explicitly recommit to what they've already pledged, namely that the New Deal for workers will be delivered in full within the first 100 days of office, then a red line will be crossed. Labour's vow to delivering a straightforward right of access for trade unions and a much simplified route to recognition and therefore the right to negotiate is the litmus test for Unite. It's a political non-negotiable. TUC President and Fire Brigade Union General Secretary Matt Rack also said any weakening of worker protections in Labour's deal will provoke a, quote, hostile reaction. Of course, Labour is actually following a Europe-wide trend here. Earlier this year, EU lawmakers failed to get a piece of legislation across the line that was aimed at boosting the rights of 28 million gig economy workers, giving them access to benefits like sick pay. Countries including France and Germany blocked the deal from abstentions after lobbying from companies like Uber, Bolt and Free Now, which all rely on the employment of gig economy workers. So, the EU rules for gig workers' rights have been massively diluted to get them over the line. They have now been passed, and the new text makes it much harder for gig economy workers to be classified as full-time employees. The UK may have left the EU, but it seems the problem of platform capitalism is still plaguing all of Europe. Helena, what I want to know is, why are politicians so bad at protecting workers?
At the end of the day, this is going to be about the material interests of capital and labour, the dialectic between the two halves of the division of labour under capitalism. Now, it used to be, especially in the UK, that there would be some parties who would represent capital, and then, crucially, one half supposed to represent labour. Clue is in the name. And unfortunately, at this point, they have also essentially been corrupted by the same forces that are pro-capitalist. Again, really important to state, the New Deal for Working People was the second most popular policy when polled by Luke Trill at More in Common, behind their £28 billion climate change pledge, which has already been watered down. And now this is also getting watered down, essentially not under the auspices of, well, how many votes can we gain, given how popular the policy is? Because at the end of the day, one big metric for Labour's policy prospectus is, what do we think is going to get us the most votes? As we've seen, they will change any position based upon whether or not they think it's popular. But people don't usually as much talk about what is going on behind the scenes in terms of getting people on the side of business on side. For such, we've seen Rachel Reeves having meetings with people from the financial sector. There was one person there from the prudential regulator, so I guess that's fine anyway. Even so, in the Labour manifesto, they want to have more people from businesses involved in policy making when it comes into government. And this is also the new people who have been donating to the party. Previously, the kind of people who would only usually donate to the Conservative Party, who represent capital, who represent the side of that class conflict representing capital, are now not just donating to the party, but they're part of the party now. Rupert Soames, who's head of the Confederation of British Industry, basically was the one who was spearheading this desire to water down the basic rights outlined in the New Deal for Working People. And one of their policy advisors, or somebody used to be a policy advisor for them, Keir Mather, is now an MP for the Labour Party. That should tell you just how much the forces of capital have influence within Labour right now, as well as the fact that when it comes to policy, they have far more influence than the National Policy Forum or the Labour membership in terms of setting policy. Now, I remember people from GMB and Unite walked out of one of the meetings at the National Policy Forum to set Labour policy when the current set of proposals before getting watered down were on the table because they were so unhappy with them, especially around things like the gig economy, which wasn't part of the New Deal for working people. They'd already been scrapped, was caused a fracas between the unions and the Labour leadership. And this is going even further because essentially policy is being subcontracted out by the Labour Party to Labour Together, who are the people who are behind Keir Starmer's leadership, that think tank, and the Tony Blair Institute, who will be the people actually really and truly wanted to see these plans watered down to be pro-business. This is why, when Rachel Reeves tries to tell you that the Labour Party is going to be both pro-business and pro-worker, this is a lie. This is not a thing that you can be. This is not something that you can completely solve, the idea of class conflict, because these two interests are mutually in conflict. They cannot be resolved. They can be mediated. You can quite say, we're going to mediate this conflict. But try and claim that you can be pro both at the same time is just not a thing that you can be. It's fully contradictory. And quite frankly, personally, it was the gig economy stuff that is the biggest climb down for me. The big Labour dispute of our current era is the casualization of our workforce. It's the movement from proper contracts to independent contractors, essentially to remove workers' rights and access to the kind of benefits that people took for granted that were won by trade unions for over decades of campaigning. And so the Labour Party abandoning this is, quite frankly, as far as I'm concerned, ideological treason, one of the many reasons that I left the party. And one last thing I'd like to point out about this is that this New Deal for working people, this was the brainchild of Angela Rayner. There used to be a position in the Shadow Cabinet called the Secretary of State for the Future of Work. And it was her in that position who was liaising with unions to create this policy that's now being watered down. And on top of the fact that she keeps getting briefed against by people within the Labour right of the party, the fact that she's still happy at this point to put herself through the ritual humiliation of being probably the only person in the Labour front bench now who's got a proper, blue or pink collar career under their belt rather than just being a member of the professional managerial class, that she won't even put up a fight against her baby, her part of the legislation being essentially torn apart by people outside of her control. And it just shows you how little people are happy to wield power on the soft left of the party and indeed on the hard left of the party. What's John McDonnell going to do? Write a strongly worded letter? That's the point that we're at, where I do think that engagement with Labour is so difficult because of the powers at force in the background, shifting the interests of the party away from where it should be, which is working people, which is the trade unions and the Labour movement more broadly.
God, that was a real tour de force of analysis. Thank you as ever, Helena, for joining me tonight, because there was a lot to get through, but I think it all knitted together in a way that maps out where we are politically currently, and a lot of direct action to talk about.
Absolutely. I really appreciate coming on. Always absolute pleasure sharing the stage with you, Moya. And I look forward to next time.
And there will be a next time, because Helena is one of our favourite regulars. Thank you to all of you for tuning in. And remember, I got to say it, polls are open till 10 p.m, even if you vote for, as Oliver Kant, one of our moderators, said, the Lanyard Party. They're open for mayoral elections in London, the North East, the East Midlands and West Midlands, and many other areas, Manchester, Liverpool. Plus, there are elections for some local authorities in England and a by-election in Blackpool South taking place today. The results for that race will be in tomorrow, so do come back at 6 p.m. for tomorrow's stream. We'll be covering all of those results that have come in and a certain interview with a certain controversial politician who's been very active in the Northwest. Now, you have been watching Novara Media. Join your local anti-raids. Good night.